Hey everyone, I hope you're all having a good day. Today, I wanted to talk about a topic that has been circulating around the community recently about the state of the tank role and specifically why it can sometimes feel really terrible to play. When I say terrible, I'm mostly referring to the enjoyability of the tank role rather than the balancing, although balance does play a factor. From what I've seen in the community, most people seem to agree that the tank role is the least fun role to play right now. More concrete evidence of this can be seen via the queue times. At pretty much any time in the day, at least in my region, tank always has the fastest queue times out of all the roles despite only having one spot on each team, meaning that there aren't enough tank players to meet the demand from the damage and support roles. When I play quick play, I'll sometimes queue for all roles and you would expect to be placed as tank 1 out of every 5 games, and yet it often seems like you're placed tank 4 out of every 5 games. I think one major reason for the unpopularity of the tank role just boils down to the nature of the role itself. Playing tank can sometimes feel stressful, especially if you're a more casual player. As the tank, you're kind of the anchor of the team, keeping the team together, and a single mistake can lead to an entire teamfight being lost, possibly followed by some complaints from your teammates. As with any game, most players just play the game casually for fun and as such aren't interested in trying to hold up an entire team on their shoulders. Being the leader can be thrilling to some, but most people prefer to stay away from all the attention and the verbal abuse that comes with it. In addition, the tank role involves several more responsibilities compared to the other roles. The damage role is primarily in charge of shooting things, and the support role is in charge of healing things and can also damage. Meanwhile, tanks also have to shoot at things while also peeling for the enemy backline, holding the corners, taking the space, managing the cooldowns, tracking the enemy cooldowns, and more. Tank cooldowns are arguably the most important cooldowns since they are the primary way that you can take and hold space. As a consequence of being the most obvious point of pressure on your team, you are also the first thing that most enemies will think of countering. And it seems that almost everyone knows the tank counters for every tank. There are 5 players on the enemy team, and there is always a way for one of the players to counter you, so you will almost certainly be countered every single game. Oftentimes, there will be even more than one person who will be countering you, and sometimes even the entire team will pick specifically to stop you from playing the game. You could swap to a different tank, but you will very likely be faced with an immediate counter swap again by at least one of the enemy players, which puts you in the same position you were before. Not to mention that counters in the tank role are typically much harder counters than the counters other roles have to face. For example, Soldier is often set to counter Pharah, but it's more like Soldier has options to deal with Pharah, and a good Pharah player will still have options against a good Soldier. When it comes to tanks, counters can feel like they take all your options away from you, especially if you're being countered by more than one person. This is in part a result of the one-dimensional nature of tank design. Brawl tanks brawl, poke tanks poke, and dive tanks dive. Tanks are specialists who excel at one thing, and in theory this means that you could potentially be a big problem for the enemy. But in practice, you just end up being a big punching bag. And this is amplified by the fact that within your role, you are forced to absorb the full force of all your counters. In the damage and support role, if someone decides to counter you, the other player playing the same role can compensate for your weaknesses, which is one reason that counters feel much softer on the damage and support roles. This inevitably leads to the rock paper scissors counter watch meta that we are seeing, where the optimal way to play tank is to continuously swap in response to the enemies. You don't have the ability to synergize with another character to cover each other's weaknesses and form a cohesive unit. Although this is technically not unbalanced, since every player can swap at respawn, it certainly makes the role more annoying to play and therefore less fun. I agree that if you one-trick, it's not really the game's fault if you get countered, but the truth is that we all have our favorite characters, and not being able to play that character to its full potential the majority of your games can make the game feel unmotivating to play. Interestingly, although the tank role faces the most pressure out of anyone on the team, it is arguably the least influential role in the game, at least during the past few seasons. There seems to be plenty of potential to throw the game as tank, yet disproportionately little potential to carry the game. Games can often feel out of your control as you are naturally very reliant on your team. You're reliant on your supports to heal you for survivability and reliant on your DPS to secure kills. Unlike squishies, you generally can't take the time to heal yourself with health packs or chase after low HP targets. As the anchor of the team, you have to be exactly where everyone expects you to be, otherwise you risk giving up too much space. If your team is lacking at doing a certain job, it's difficult to make up for that as a tank, and you're kind of just out of luck. As a tank, maybe you see the enemy Kiriko overextend, so of course you should start shooting her, bring her to low HP, just to see her scissor herself before she dies and then get healed. But wait, you do the same thing, but this time she literally TPs through a wall. So you say screw it, I'll aim at the enemy Baptiste, who then uses regen burst followed by immortality field to nullify all your damage. So you say screw it again, I'll aim at one of the enemy DPS's who's overextending just to see them get double pocketed by the supports you just chased away. So you aim at the other DPS who's isolated and maybe taking an off angle and bring them to low HP, but you can't chase them to finish the kill, since if you do, your team will get run over by the enemy tank. So now, since you chased away the squishies and burned away the resources, you switch your attention finally to the enemy tank. But wait, they're tanky, so it takes forever to burn through their health pool. And right before the enemy gets punished for overextending, the Kiriko now has Suzu again, allowing the tank to get healed to full, so you have to burn through the tank's health pool again, and even if you do, surprise, Baptiste now has Immortality Field again. Now technically, in the scenario that I'm describing, there isn't really anything wrong with what is happening. You're absorbing the enemy cooldowns, chipping away at their health, pushing them back, all while surviving yourself. So as a tank, you would be doing your job. If you were actually able to pull off the hypothetical scenario that I described consistently, you would undoubtedly win the majority of your games. But the question is, does the scenario result in a fun experience? Does it activate the dopamine receptors of the average player? Probably not. The average FPS gamer probably doesn't get any happy feelings by getting a resource advantage. What the average player understands is, me shoot, me kill, me happy. Although you might be doing your job, you're inevitably still at the mercy of your team, hoping that they will be doing their jobs well enough to capitalize on the space that you're creating, and having no other options if they're not. Tank games can often feel like you're doing everything you can, yet nothing on the enemy team is dying and you're making no progress. Even in games where you are winning, it can feel like you're only winning because you happen to have the better team. And if the teams are evenly matched, it can often result in multi-minute stalemates where you're just facing off with the enemy tank, while you both wait for one of your teammates to make a mistake, but not being able to punish the enemy mistakes yourself, so you just stand at the front line, hoping that the tides of the battle will be in your favor. On tank, you never really have the opportunity to take a risk and make a play because doing anything except contesting the enemy tank will only result in the enemy tank running down your team. Unfortunately, the unfunness of the tank role might just be how things are. Maybe it's just the reality of tanking in general. Even in other genres of games like League of Legends, tanks are often thought of as the boring role, no matter if they're strong or weak. I admit that thus far, I've only really done the easy thing, which is raise a problem and not bring up any solutions. And the reason for that is because, to be honest, I don't have a solution. Maybe tanks just need to be stronger in general in order to increase their agency, but if we only tweak the numbers like health and damage, it risks creating the opposite problem where tanks are too strong and become the only meaningful player on the team, and everyone else is just forced to run away as if they're being chased down by a monster in a horror game. If we don't want to change anything else, maybe tanks just need to be fundamentally redesigned across the board, to allow them to be more generalized and therefore less vulnerable to being countered by giving them more options against the things that make them weak. But an 11 character rework is probably an unfeasible option, not to mention that making every tank more similar would cause the tank to lose its identity. Some points that I've seen other players bring up is that they believe that it is actually the state of the support role that is to blame, citing the fact that healing numbers are too high and that there are too many get out of jail free abilities, allowing them to simply nullify their own or their teammates' mistakes at the press of a button. Another very popular discussion that is happening is whether the very nature of 5v5 as opposed to 6v6 is to blame for the unfun nature of the tank role, and maybe even the balance of the game as a whole. I myself have never played Overwatch 1, so I can't really contribute to the 5v5 versus 6v6 conversation from experience, but I can certainly see where the argument comes from. That's all I have to say for now. If you made it this far, I wanted to say thank you for watching and consider subscribing and leaving a like and comment to support the channel. I hope you have a wonderful day.